Mr. Lee will now demonstrate the form. Before we get started with the form itself, we're going to demonstrate some of the grips that are going to be used in the form. As you can see right now, the bow is held in a 1/3 position. In other words, 1/3 of the bow sticks out either side of the hand, and the other third is held in the center. This is generally how the bow is held, although in this particular form you're going to be making a lot of changes on that grip. Right now, Mr. Lee is demonstrating that the right palm is up and the left palm is down. He can also reverse that grip and put the right palm down and the left palm up. Additionally, he can have both palms up or both palms can be down. 3 of these grips will be used in the form itself, but we wanted you to be aware of the different kinds of grips that we will be using throughout the form. We're going to start by demonstrating a few warm-up exercises. The first one we're going to demonstrate is a figure 8. In this particular warm-up exercise, the bow should be held pretty well at its midpoint. Mr. Lee is going to demonstrate that now by twirling the bow in a figure 8 fashion on either side of his body. You will notice that the lead of the bow, in other words, the part of the bow that comes out between your thumb and your index finger, is passed to either side of the body in a figure 8 motion. You need to be able to do this with both left hand and right hand, so Mr. Lee will demonstrate now how to change that while the bow is moving to the left hand position. He still keeps the bow moving in the figure 8 pattern. Now he'll come forward with that, switch it back over to the right hand, and then come forward with that with both hands in the figure 8 position. In this particular case, the right hand is the lead hand on that, and the left hand is following. You need to practice this until this becomes very comfortable. The next motion we're going to demonstrate is a twirl. This is when the bow is passed in a vertical plane in front of the body. Mr. Lee will demonstrate that now. Notice the handwork, how the bow is passed from one hand to the other as it twirls in front of the body. You need to practice this in both directions. He's doing it to the right now, then he will reverse that and go to the left. This needs to be practiced until it becomes a very natural motion. Next, we're going to demonstrate blocking with the bow. We'll start off by demonstrating high and low blocks. In this case, the bow is thrust out from your center This is what gives you strength and power in the block. Now, from high and low, Mr. Lee will demonstrate going using a vertical block left and right. Notice that the bow in each case is brought back to the center and thrust out again. This is what gives you power and strength in the block. Next, Mr. Lee is going to demonstrate a four-direction strike. First, the strike will come from the top, then from the bottom, then from the right, and then from the left. Top, bottom, right, and left. Okay, while he's doing this, I want you to remember that precision is the important part of this. If you picture a tennis ball in front of you and you're taking the bow tip and touching each side of the tennis ball, that will help improve your precision. Next, Mr. Lee is going to demonstrate the side step blocks. In this particular case, we're going to be doing two blocks. First with the right palm up and the left palm down. The right palm goes over the top and executes the block. The left hand goes behind the arm to support the bow. Going the other direction, the grip will change. The left palm will be up, the right palm will be down. The left palm does the block by executing a roll to the left, and the right hand goes behind the arm to support the block. In all of this form, many of the grips are fluid and change during the form, so you need to practice doing this by taking the block first to the right, bringing it back around, and continuing the motion with the block to the left. Mr. Lee will do this several times so you can see the handwork as the block is being done. Now he will add the footwork where we're doing a side step with the block. So as he goes to the right this time, he will demonstrate the side step with the block, coming back to the left, doing the side step with the block. To the right and to the left. The next motion we're going to demonstrate, for lack of a better term, we are calling a nunchuck handoff. In this case, the bow is gripped in the 1/3 position, 1/3 away from the end of the bow. The bow will be passed in front of you and over your shoulder, goes behind your arm. You'll reach underneath with the other hand and grip the bow. Mr. Lee will demonstrate how the bow comes up against your arm at that point. Okay? Then you release with your right hand, bring the bow in front with the left hand, over the top, behind the arm. Demonstrate how that comes against your shoulder again. Okay? And the bow is now exchanged to the right hand. While he's doing this, you need to practice this so you don't have to look for the bow, but you feel it when it comes up behind you and touches your arm. The next motion Mr. Lee is going to demonstrate is a forward and a rear thrust. The bow is held in the 1/3 position with the right palm up. As he thrusts the bow forward, he rotates into a front stance and locks the bow under his arm. As he comes back for the rear thrust, he slides into a kima stance and strikes to the rear. In this particular case, the two striking points are the face forward and the solar plex to the rear. These will change throughout the form, but the basic motion is the same. Again, a forward thrust and a rear thrust. Mr. Lee will be demonstrating the major stances that we'll be using in the form. The first one is the front stance, in which 60% of the weight is placed on the front leg, the knee is bent over the top of the foot, and the rear leg is locked out. The next stance will be the back stance, in which the weight is shifted to the rear. 60% is on the rear leg, 40% is on the front leg, and the feet are at 90 degrees to each other. Also, we will be using a kima stance, in which the weight is equal on both feet and the knees are spread apart. Also, we will be using a crane stance, in which the person is standing on one foot and the other foot is tucked behind the knee of the leg you're standing on. And lastly, Mr. Lee will demonstrate a side step into the Kima stance. We'll be using this in the form also. For teaching purposes, we've decided to break the form down into 4 sections. Mr. Lee will now demonstrate the first section, and then we will break each of these motions down into its particular parts. You may begin. Now Mr. Lee is going to demonstrate the first sequence of motions into defensive position. We're going to break this down into its component parts. The first part is the twirl with the right hand. You'll notice from the initializing position, or Junbi position, the bow is held at the midpoint in the right hand with the palm up. The bow comes out in front and twirls in the right hand in a figure-8 fashion. He steps back as he does this, and the bow is passed on either side of the rear leg in the figure-8. Mr. Lee will now turn 90 degrees to demonstrate how the bow is passing on either side of the rear leg. Bringing the bow tip around, he's going to demonstrate the tuck motion at the end of this, where the lead part of the bow that comes out between the index finger and the thumb, comes under the arm, and the bow is tucked behind the shoulder. Turning back 90 degrees now, he will demonstrate the left hand. In this motion, the left hand comes out, is raised above the head, and presses down in a flat position to the waist level, and then chops to the outside. Now, putting all of those motions together into the initial motion, he will demonstrate that now. Mr. Lee is now going to demonstrate the second sequence, which is a striking attack to the knee. The bow is brought out in front, rolled over the top of the head in a helicopter rotation, and the knee strike comes from the outside. He also drops to his right knee at the same time he executes this strike. Now the entire sequence. Mr. Lee will now demonstrate the second motion, which is a stepping side block. He steps out with the right leg, the bow is brought over the top, the left leg goes behind, and he executes the block to the side. He will now demonstrate that in its entirety. Mr. Lee will now demonstrate the next striking sequence. It's a 5-count strike. He's going to turn 180 degrees. The first strike will be to the right, then to the left, then to the top, then the bottom, and back to the right again. Now he'll demonstrate all of these strikes in their sequence. The next motion will be a 90-degree turn with 2 head strikes. He's going to turn 90 degrees in a front stance, striking first from the left and then back to the right. Putting those together again. The next motion will be a slide up into a Kima stance with a hooking pare block, and then a side shuffle into a thrust to the solar plex. Putting both of those motions together. Mr. Lee will demonstrate the next motion now. It's a slow sweep, turning 270 degrees to the left, coming around with a high strike to the left side of the head. Doing that again from that position. You will note when he does this that the right foot follows the bow around 180 degrees and he ends in a front stance. And one more time at speed. Now Mr. Lee will demonstrate the next sequence, and then we'll break that down into its component parts. Okay, going back from the first position. The first thing he will do is turn his right hand over so both palms are down on the bow. As he slides up, he will plant the tip of the bow in preparation for a side kick to the solar plex. Now he'll execute a spinning heel kick to the head, and as he comes around, the bow will do one turn and then tuck back under his arm as we did in the first defensive position. He'll now demonstrate that again at the proper speed. Mr. Lee will now demonstrate the next sequence, which is a three-strike sequence to the head, midsection, and knee. Okay, breaking that down into its component parts. The first strike, the bow is brought in front and rotated over the head in a helicopter fashion, striking the head into a front stance. As he strikes the midsection, he rotates his hip to add power into the strike, and on the last knee strike, with the hip rotation, he drops the right knee down, but not touching the ground for the strike to the knee. Now he'll demonstrate that motion again. The next motion Mr. Lee will demonstrate is a side step block with a turn and a thrust to the rear, and then another pivot with a thrust to the face. We'll now break that down into its parts. From the position you were in, take a step to the side and do the side step block as we did in the practice sessions. Then he's going to pivot around so he strikes to the rear in a kima stance, then pivot into a front stance with a strike to the face. Okay, one more time at full speed. The next motion Mr. Lee will demonstrate is a step over with a double strike to the head. Okay, backing up, we'll break that down again. He's first going to step over the person, then as he raises his leg to step back into the front stance, he does the first head strike, then steps down and does the second head strike. Okay, one more time. The next motion Mr. Lee will be demonstrating is a jumping front kick with a strike to the knee. Okay, going back, we'll break this down into its component parts. We'll work on the footwork first. This is a phase 3 front kick where you step forward with the right foot, fake with the left knee, and strike with the right foot. Following the kick, you will drop your left knee down in the proximity of the ground, but it won't be touching. Okay? Now we'll add the use of the bow with this. Okay, from this position, the bow will be brought around in front and tucked under the right arm. It stays behind the arm as the front kick is executed, then brought over the head in a helicopter rotation with a strike to the knee. Okay, backing up, we're going to make a point here, so that the key to putting these two together is to bring the bow in front and have it tucked as you make the first step with your right foot. Then it is cleared in front of your body so the kick can be executed. Okay, backing up one more time. Mr. Lee will demonstrate this motion. The last motion in the first section will be a shift to the rear, shifting back forward into the front stance with a thrust to the face and a ki on the thrust. One more time, Mr. Lee will demonstrate that. Make sure you shift into a back stance as you shift back here. Coming back to a full front stance with a thrust to the face and a ki. One more time. That concludes the first section. Mr. Lee will now demonstrate that again in its entirety. Mr. Lee will now demonstrate the second section of the form. Mr. Lee will now demonstrate the first sequence in the second section. Okay, we'll break that down into its component parts, starting with the footwork first. From the front stance, he'll rotate 180 degrees on his right foot. The left foot comes to the knee with his foot turned out. Drops down, changing stance, coming up on the left leg with his right foot to the knee and the foot turned out. He'll reverse that position now so you can see the footwork. Okay, now we'll add the bow to that. On the first 180 degrees of rotation, the bow is brought over the head in a helicopter rotation with a strike to the head. The bow tip starts at the 12 o'clock position, rotating around the clock. When it gets to the 6 o'clock position, the stance changes. The bow is then brought to the side for a thrust, and he steps forward into the front stance with a thrust to the face. He'll now demonstrate all of those motions together. Mr. Lee will now demonstrate the second sequence. Okay, going back, we'll demonstrate the first half of this sequence is the same as what we just completed. This is where it changes. The hand comes over on the bow, so he has both palms down on the bow. The direction now changes to the right, where he steps out in a kima stance with a side thrust to the solar plex. Now demonstrating this sequence one more time. Mr. Lee will now demonstrate the next sequence. Okay, going back, we'll break that down into its component parts, starting with the footwork. Okay, stepping across from one kima stance into the other. We're keeping the kima stance here. There's just a high step between each motion. Now adding the bow. The bow twirls in front of the body, comes around, and you do a side thrust to the solar plex, going to the left. Putting all of these together one more time. Mr. Lee will now demonstrate the next sequence. Okay, we'll go back and break that down into its parts. The first motion is to step forward and twirl the bow in front in a figure 8 manner. You'll do this twice. Then the bow will be kept on the left side of the body, pass behind the body in a vertical rotation, come back around, twirl one more time, and come around with a strike to the side of the head. Okay, now we'll break this down into its component parts, starting with the bow. Okay, there's a figure 8 motion done. There will be 2 of these in front of the body. After the second one, the bow will be kept on the left side. He'll simply pass it to the opposite hand and do a vertical spin of the bow on the left side of the body. That's the first half. Then the bow will be brought in front again. One more twirl, figure 8 is done, and then the bow is brought around for the strike to the side of the head. Okay, now we'll demonstrate that one more time, slowly. Stepping forward with the twirl. The bow is kept on the left side of the body. Exchange hands, continue the turn, the twirl with a strike to the left side of the head. We'll reverse that now so you can see the handwork from behind. Okay, one more time. We'll go through this at full speed this time. Mr. Lee will now demonstrate the next sequence. Okay, we'll break that down, starting with the footwork. All you're doing here is executing a 270-degree turn to the left, starting in a right foot forward front stance, ending in a left foot forward front stance. Okay, now we'll add the bow with that. As he does the turn, the bow is brought around in a horizontal plane, passed behind the back, around a helicopter rotation over the top of the head with a strike to the side of the head. One more time, demonstrating that. Around in a horizontal plane, do a hand exchange. The bow is brought around with a strike to the side of the head. And putting that all together one more time. Mr. Lee will now demonstrate the next sequence. Okay, we'll break that down to its parts. The first motion is to slide up in a kima stance, bring the bow in front with a figure 8. From the chest, you're going to do a low defense, blocking the groin. Now the bow is brought back to the chest, stepping back into a left foot front stance with a face strike. Folding the bow to the side, You're going to do one more thrust to the face, locking the bow under the arm. One more time with that sequence. Mr. Lee will now demonstrate the next sequence. Okay, now we'll break that down into its component parts. The first thing he will do is plant the bow in a blocking position on the left leg. Do a step-through side kick. Now he's going to turn, look first, turn, and do a high defense. Now the bow will hook, come out and hook like you're hooking behind the person's head, pushing the head down, bringing the knee up into a solar plex strike. Now you're going to push the person down and essentially do a somersault over the top of the person's back and do a high defense following the somersault. You're on the left knee with the right knee up. Okay, we'll go through that one more time, slowly. Plant for the block, side kick, high defense, hook the back of the head, solar plex strike with the knee, push the head down, do the somersault over the top of the person's back, and end in a high defense. Okay, one more time through the whole sequence. Mr. Lee will now demonstrate the next section. Okay, going back and breaking that down into its component parts. From the high defensive blocking position, he'll do a front kick with the left foot, the solar plex, plant the bow in a blocking position, the side kick to the face, and turning, he will return to the initial defensive position. One more time. That concludes the second section of the form. Mr. Lee will now demonstrate the second section of the form one more time. Mr. Lee will now demonstrate the third section of the form. Mr. Lee will now demonstrate the next sequence. Okay, going back and breaking that into its component parts. First thing you do is slide up into a kima stance. Then you're going to be doing the nunchuck handoff, that exercise we did at the beginning of the tape, behind your body. You do 3 of those. Then the bow will come out in front of you, the palm down. It passes over the top of the head with the palm up, comes back down again. There's a handoff behind the back with the palm down. The bow comes over the top in a helicopter rotation and strikes the side of the head. One more time through the hand sequence. Okay, now we're going to add the footwork to that from the Kima stance. He does the 3 nunchuck handoffs in a Kima stance. Now the bow comes around over the top of the head, and as it comes behind the body, he'll begin his rotation, a high step with the right leg, then hopping off of that into continues the rotation into a front stance with the left foot forward. Okay, doing the entire motion one more time. Okay, now putting it all together. Mr. Lee will now demonstrate the next sequence. Okay, going back and breaking that down into its parts. The first thing to do is to turn the right palm over so both palms are facing down. Now he's going to rotate the bow around the right side as he steps forward for the first over-the-top strike. Then he does that again on the left side, and one more time on the right side. Okay, going back and putting it all together. Mr. Lee will now demonstrate the next sequence. Okay, going back and breaking that down into its component parts. Starting from the last strike position, both palms are down. He's going to slide back in a left foot forward back stance, and the hand will roll over on the bow as he executes a sweeping block into the upright position instead of a palm down position. Okay, demonstrating that one more time. Palm rolls over on the bow as he steps back in the back stance and executes a sweeping block. Now he'll step forward in a modified cat stance where he steps through on the cat stance and does a thrust to the chin. Okay, going back and doing those motions together. Mr. Lee will now demonstrate the next section. Okay, going back and breaking that down into its component parts. The first thing I'll do is execute a turn to the right 90 degrees with a sweeping block with the bow low and a high defense and pseudo position with the left hand. And he's going to shuffle back into a back stance with the left foot forward and do a strike to the top of the foot. The last motion will be a rotation to the right and a strike to the head with the key eye on the strike. Okay, demonstrating that one more time slowly. Crane stance with a low block and a high defense. Shuffle back into the back stance with a strike to the top of the foot and pivoting with a strike to the head. One more time. This concludes the third section. Mr. Lee will now demonstrate the third section one more time. Mr. Lee will now demonstrate section 4. Mr. Lee will now demonstrate the next sequence. Okay, backing up, we'll break this down. This is a baseball swing where he slides his left hand down toward the end of the bow to start. As the bow comes around, the right hand slides down and joins it. The bow is brought over the top of the head, comes around in a rotation, and strikes the top of the head. One of the key things to remember here is the stance and the strike should end at the same time. Okay, one more time. Mr. Lee will now demonstrate the next sequence. Okay, going back, we'll break this down into the footwork first. He's starting off in a left foot forward front stance. He'll do a lunging stance to the side on a 45-degree angle and ending in a crane stance, and coming back on that same 45-degree line into a left foot forward front stance, and then keeping that same 45-degree line into a right foot forward front stance. Okay, now we'll add the bow with that. Okay, from here, the bow is going to come around to the side and sweep, and what you're looking for here is the tip of the left hand. There should be a straight line from that down through the shoulders, through the bow, when you complete the sweeping block. That should be a straight line. Now he's going to step back into the front stance, left foot forward front stance with a strike to the head, stepping forward into the right foot forward front stance with a strike to the face. Okay, now all those motions together again. Mr. Lee will now demonstrate the next sequence. Okay, going back and breaking that down into its parts. What he's going to do is a high defense first, just going straight up the center of the form again, the high defense. Now the bow will be folded to the side. He'll execute a phase 3 front kick, and coming around with the knee strike, similar to what we did at the end of the first section. Okay, going back, he'll demonstrate that sequence one more time. Mr. Lee will now demonstrate the next sequence. Okay, going back, we'll break it down in the footwork first. From the low position here, he's going to jump, bringing his knees up and land in a left foot forward front stance at 90 degrees. Then he'll slide the right foot across into another front stance, right foot forward this time. Now we'll add the bow with that. From the low motion, as he lands on the jump, he's going to do a double strike, first with the left to the left side, then to the right, then he's going to slide the foot across with another strike to the side of the head. One more time. Mr. Lee will now demonstrate the next sequence. Okay, we're going to break that down into its component parts, starting with the footwork. Okay, from a right foot forward stance, front stance. He turns and looks to the left. What he's going to execute here is a phase 3 inside crescent kick, where he leads with the right foot on the first step, fakes with the left foot, comes around with an inside crescent kick with the right foot, turning so he's facing a 45-degree angle to the rear. Okay, one more time doing that. One of the key elements here to remember is when you're doing the fake with the left leg is to bring that across your body and swing it back to the outside so you can get some snap on the inside crescent kick. Landing on the right knee in a 45-degree line. Okay, now we'll add the bow to that. We'll demonstrate the work with the bow first. He's going to fold it under his arm, as we did in our first ready position. Then, as he does the kick here, the bow is brought around and he executes a groin strike. We'll demonstrate that bow motion first, facing the camera. The bow would be held underneath the arm like this. It comes around and does one rotation, and he does the groin strike. Okay, turn 90 degrees so they can see that from the side. The other way. Okay, bringing the bow around, and he executes the groin strike after the kick. Okay, one more time we'll demonstrate that motion. Okay, now he's going to give us a reverse angle on that so you can see it coming from the other direction. All right, one more time through this sequence. Mr. Lee will now demonstrate the next sequence. Okay, he's now going to demonstrate that at 90 degrees from where it's performed so you can see the motion. The first thing he does is rotate the bow over the top, and it comes down till the bow tip touches the ground. He bows with this. Now his right hand comes up, bringing the bow with it. The left hand stays in position, his eyes following the bow. When his shoulders line up, the left hand raises to it till the bow touches the ground on this side. Draw a circle to the left with the bow tip touching the ground. As it comes over the top, he raises it and drops back into a back stance with the bow in a ready position. He will demonstrate this one more time. We'll describe what's going on here. What this represents is your bowing as the bow comes over the top. Now the bow is representing the sunrise and its ascension. Now the bow comes around him, representing the rotation of the earth, and as it comes up, it represents us ascending from that. He's now in a back stance. This should be on the same line as he was when he began. Okay, we'll demonstrate this motion one more time from its original position. Mr. Lee will now demonstrate the next sequence. Okay, going back from his starting position there, We'll break it down and do the footwork first. He's simply going to slide up with his right foot, going from a 45-degree line into a back stance down the center of the form again. Okay, adding the bow with that. He steps up. The bow comes in the right hand. He does it. The left hand presses down, as we did in the first sequence of the form. Okay, one more time in its entirety. Mr. Lee will now demonstrate the final motion in the form. Okay, going back to his starting position, his feet slide up in a foot-together position facing the front. The bow is brought out in front, does one twirl and tucks back underneath the arm. The bow and hand cross in front of the body as he steps out into the Jumbi position. One more time. That concludes form. Mr. Lee will now demonstrate the fourth section of the form. Mr. Lee will now demonstrate the form.